Walter was an early riser. His routine included a morning jog around Central Park, followed by breakfast at the local diner, Maggie's, where he always ordered the same: scrambled eggs and black coffee. Lately, Christina had been missing from these morning routines. She claimed to be working late on a project at her job at the advertising agency, but Walter couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, Walter returned home from work earlier than usual. He found Christina in the living room, whispering into her phone. She ended the call abruptly when she saw him, her expression a mixture of surprise and guilt. "Just talking to a friend," she said, tucking her phone into her pocket. Over the next few weeks, Christina's behavior grew more suspicious. She would often step out of the house to take calls or text messages in the middle of the night. Her explanations were vague and unconvincing. Walter began to notice that she frequently checked her phone, smiling at messages and quickly hiding the screen when he was nearby. One Saturday, Christina left for what she said was a work meeting. Walter decided to follow her. She drove to a coffee shop on the other side of town, one they never visited. From his car, Walter watched as Christina met a man he didn't recognize. They sat close, talking animatedly, their heads bent together in a way that suggested more than friendship. That night, Walter couldn't sleep. He lay awake, replaying the day's events and trying to make sense of Christina's actions. He remembered the private investigator he had once hired for a business dispute and decided to give him a call. The next day, Walter met with Detective Harris at a small, dimly lit bar downtown. Harris, a grizzled man with a thick mustache, listened intently as Walter explained the situation. "Leave it to me," Harris said, sliding a business card across the table. "I'll find out what's going on." The following week, Walter continued his daily routines, trying to act normal. He went to work, jogged in the park, and ate breakfast at Maggie's. But his mind was elsewhere, constantly drifting back to Christina and the mystery man. Each day, Harris sent updates via encrypted emails, detailing his observations. Christina had been meeting the same man regularly, sometimes at the coffee shop, other times at a hotel downtown. Walter's suspicions were confirmed when Harris sent a series of photos showing Christina and the man, identified as Leonard, in various intimate settings. They looked comfortable, familiar with each other, the body language unmistakable. Harris's report detailed dates, times, and locations, painting a clear picture of an ongoing affair. Walter felt a mix of betrayal and determination. He knew he had to confront Christina but needed a plan. He spent the next few days gathering his thoughts, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. On a chilly Thursday evening, Walter waited for Christina to come home. As she walked through the door, he called her to the living room. "Christina, we need to talk," he said, holding the envelope containing Harris's report. Christina looked at him, her face pale, sensing the gravity of the moment. Walter handed her the envelope and watched as she opened it, her eyes widening with each photograph she pulled out. "We both know what this is about," Walter said, his voice steady. "Now, it's time to come clean." Detective Harris worked quickly. Within a week, he had compiled a detailed report with photographic evidence. The images showed Christina meeting Leonard at various locations: a quiet bistro, a park bench, and even a boutique hotel downtown. Harris handed Walter a manila envelope filled with pictures and a detailed timeline of Christina's movements. Walter spent an entire evening at his desk, reviewing the contents. Each image was time-stamped, showing clear evidence of the affair. He saw Christina and Leonard holding hands, sharing meals, and entering the hotel together. Harris's notes included conversations he had overheard, confirming the relationship was more than just casual. The next morning, Walter prepared for work but couldn't focus. He skipped his jog and went straight to Maggie's diner, where he usually had breakfast. The scrambled eggs and black coffee were untouched as he pondered his next move. He decided it was time to confront Christina. He couldn't let this go on any longer. That evening, Walter returned home early. Christina was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. He placed the manila envelope on the dining table and called her over. She looked at him, puzzled, and wiped her hands on a dish towel before opening the envelope. As she flipped through the photographs, her confusion turned to shock. "What is this?" Christina asked, her voice shaky. "You tell me," Walter replied, keeping his tone neutral. Explain these. Christina attempted to deny the evidence, claiming the pictures were taken out of context. She said Leonard was just a friend, and they were only meeting to discuss work. Walter remained silent, letting her speak. When she finished, he handed her a copy of Harris's report, which included detailed notes of their conversations. Work discussions at a hotel? Walter asked, raising an eyebrow. What about these notes? Harris heard you two talking about your future together. Christina's facade crumbled. She slumped into a chair, her head in her hands. I'm sorry, she whispered. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Walter remained standing, arms crossed. How long has this been going on? He demanded. Christina admitted the affair had started months ago. She met Leonard through a mutual friend, and it quickly escalated from innocent meetings to clandestine encounters. She tried to explain, but Walter cut her off, unwilling to hear excuses. Walter spent the next few days avoiding Christina, leaving early and coming home late. He needed space to think. Christina tried to make amends, but Walter was resolute in his decision to stay distant. He resumed his morning jogs in Central Park, seeking solace in the familiar routine. One evening, Walter found himself at the bar where he first met Harris. He needed advice on what to do next. Harris suggested divorce, but warned it could get messy. Walter wasn't ready for that step yet. He needed to ensure Christina would never hurt him again. Walter devised a plan. He would pretend to forgive Christina, make her believe they could work things out. Meanwhile, he would gather more evidence, something that would ensure he had the upper hand in any legal proceedings. He wanted to make sure Christina paid for her betrayal. The next week, Walter approached Christina with a proposal. Let's try to fix this, he said, feigning sincerity. Christina, desperate for reconciliation, agreed. They attended counseling sessions, went out for dinners, and tried to act like a normal couple. All the while, Walter was meticulous, documenting every interaction and keeping a close watch on her activities. Christina, believing she had a second chance, cut off contact with Leonard. Walter monitored her phone and email, ensuring there were no hidden messages. He played the role of a forgiving husband, all the while setting the stage for his final move. In the midst of this charade, Walter kept in close contact with Harris, updating him on the situation. He knew it was only a matter of time before Christina slipped up again, giving him the final piece of evidence he needed to confront her once more. This time with no chance of denial, Walter continued his act of reconciliation, attending counseling sessions and going on dates with Christina. They spent weekends visiting familiar places, like the farmers market downtown and their favorite hiking trail at Bear Mountain. All the while, Walter documented everything meticulously, waiting for the right moment to act. One evening, after a counseling session, Walter and Christina sat in their living room. Walter casually brought up Leonard, questioning her about their interactions. Christina, cornered and anxious, warned him sternly. "Don't mess with my lover. He'll crush you into dust without a second thought," she said. Walter pretended to take her warning seriously, nodding in agreement. "All right," he said, "I'll stay away." But in his mind, the wheels of revenge were already turning. He knew he had to act carefully and strategically. Over the next few days, Walter continued his normal routines. He jogged in Central Park, ate breakfast at Maggie's, and maintained his work schedule. He kept a low profile, avoiding any direct confrontation with Leonard. Instead, he began gathering more information. Walter visited the library, researching everything he could about Leonard. He discovered that Leonard had a shady past, including several run-ins with the law. He frequented a bar called the Blue Oyster, known for its under-the-table dealings. Walter made a mental note to visit the place. On a Friday night, Walter walked into the Blue Oyster. The bar was dimly lit, filled with a mix of locals and suspicious characters. He spotted Leonard at a corner table, talking to a group of men. Walter sat at the bar, ordered a drink, and observed. Leonard's interactions were intense, filled with hushed conversations and exchanged envelopes. The following day, Walter met with Detective Harris again, this time at a secluded diner on the outskirts of town. He shared his findings about Leonard's background and connections. Harris listened intently, nodding as Walter laid out his plan. They decided to monitor Leonard more closely, looking for the perfect opportunity to strike. Walter began frequenting the Blue Oyster, slowly integrating himself into the background. He made casual conversation with the bartenders and regulars, learning more about Leonard's operations. One night, he overheard a conversation about a shipment arriving at the docks, something big and illegal. Armed with this information, Walter informed Harris. Together, they planned a sting operation. Harris would tip off the authorities about the shipment while Walter ensured Leonard was caught red-handed. The plan was set in motion, with both men playing their parts perfectly. As the night of the operation approached, Walter continued to act normally at home. He and Christina attended a charity gala, mingling with friends and acquaintances. Christina seemed more relaxed, believing their relationship was on the mend. Walter, however, was focused on the task ahead. The night of the shipment, Walter positioned himself at the docks, hidden from view. He watched as Leonard and his associates arrived, unloading crates from a truck. Moments later, the sound of sirens filled the air. Police cars surrounded the area, and officers moved in, arresting Leonard and his men. Walter watched from the shadows as Leonard was handcuffed and led away. He felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing his plan had worked. But he wasn't done yet. He knew he had to confront Christina one last time, with all the evidence he had gathered. Returning home, Walter found Christina in the living room, watching TV. He stood in front of her, holding a new manila envelope. "It's over," he said, tossing the envelope onto the coffee table. Christina looked at him, confused, before opening the envelope and seeing the photos and documents inside. She glanced up at Walter, realization dawning in her eyes. "What have you done?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I've taken care of everything," Walter replied. "Now it's your turn to face the consequences." Walter devised a plan to gain Leonard's trust. He began by frequenting the places where Leonard often spent time, such as the Blue Oyster Bar and a gym on 8th Avenue. One evening, Walter approached Leonard at the bar, offering to buy him a drink. "I'm Walter," he introduced himself, extending a hand. Leonard shook it, eyeing him curiously. Over the next few weeks, Walter made a point of running into Leonard at various locations. He started casual conversations about sports, work, and life in general. Gradually, he steered the discussions toward his supposed marital problems. "Christina and I are just not working out," Walter confided one evening at the bar. "I think it's time for us to go our separate ways." Leonard seemed sympathetic, offering advice and sharing his own experiences. Walter played the part of the disgruntled husband perfectly, painting a picture of an unhappy marriage. He mentioned considering a separation and hinted at having feelings for someone else. This piqued Leonard's interest, and he began to open up more, seeing Walter as a potential ally rather than a rival. Walter's next move was to invite Leonard to a poker game with some of his work friends. The game was held at Walter's friend Mike's place, a cozy apartment overlooking the Hudson River. During the game, Walter made sure to lose a few hands intentionally, allowing Leonard to win. They shared laughs, drinks, and stories, further solidifying their budding friendship. In another calculated move, Walter invited Leonard to his office for lunch. He took Leonard to a high-end restaurant downtown, where they discussed business and personal life over steak and wine. Walter mentioned he was looking for new investment opportunities, subtly suggesting they might collaborate in the future. Leonard, seeing a potential business partner, started to trust Walter even more. To strengthen the bond, Walter arranged a fishing trip. He invited Leonard and a couple of other friends to a cabin by a secluded lake. They spent the weekend fishing, grilling, and talking late into the night by the campfire. Walter used this opportunity to further discuss his plans to leave Christina, making sure Leonard believed he was genuinely unhappy in his marriage. One evening, Walter invited Leonard to his home under the pretense of needing advice about a legal matter. Christina was conveniently out for the evening. They sat in Walter's study, where he showed Leonard some documents, asking for his opinion. As they talked, Walter subtly mentioned his intention to leave Christina soon, reinforcing the narrative of his dissatisfaction. Leonard, now fully trusting Walter, began to share more about his relationship with Christina. He revealed details about their meetings, their future plans, and his feelings for her. Walter listened intently, nodding and offering supportive comments, all the while mentally cataloging the information for future use. The final step in Walter's plan was to suggest a business deal. He proposed they partner on a lucrative real estate investment, something that required a substantial initial outlay. Leonard, enticed by the potential profits and blinded by his newfound friendship with Walter, agreed to consider the deal. Walter orchestrated a meeting at a luxury hotel's conference room to discuss the investment. He prepared fake documents, making the deal look legitimate. As they went over the details, Walter ensured Leonard was fully committed, promising substantial returns. Walter's meticulous planning and execution had paid off. He had successfully gained Leonard's trust, all the while setting him up for the final act of his revenge. With Leonard fully ensnared in his web, Walter knew it was only a matter of time before he could move to the next phase of his plan. Walter's plan was set into motion. He chose a remote cabin in the woods, one he had rented for fishing trips with friends. It was the perfect place, isolated and away from prying eyes. He called Leonard and told him he needed help with a personal matter, something urgent that required discretion. Leonard, seeing Walter as a friend and business partner, agreed without hesitation. Walter meticulously prepared the cabin, making sure everything was in place. He stocked the fridge with food and drinks, set up a workbench in the garage, and laid out a few tools. The scene needed to look casual, like two friends spending a weekend away. On the day of the meeting, Walter met Leonard at a diner on the edge of town. They had a quick breakfast, pancakes and coffee, before heading to the cabin. The drive was long, taking them through winding roads and dense forests. Walter kept the conversation light, discussing their business venture and future plans. When they arrived, Walter led Leonard inside, giving him a quick tour. "I thought we could use a bit of fresh air," Walter said, gesturing to the picturesque view of the surrounding woods. Leonard nodded, appreciating the tranquility. Walter suggested they start with a little target practice to unwind. He handed Leonard a rifle and set up some cans on a log a few yards away. They took turns shooting, laughing, and chatting between shots. After an hour or so, Walter proposed they head to the garage to discuss the real reason for their trip. Inside the garage, Walter pulled out a large map, spreading it across the workbench. "I've been thinking about a new investment opportunity," he said, pointing to a location on the map. Leonard leaned in, interested. Walter began to explain a fabricated story about an undeveloped piece of land with high potential value. As they discussed the fake deal, Walter subtly steered the conversation towards trust and loyalty. "In business, you need to know who your real friends are," he remarked. Leonard agreed, not sensing the trap being laid. Walter then asked Leonard to help him move some heavy boxes from the garage to the cabin, using it as a pretext to get him into a vulnerable position. While moving the boxes, Walter made sure to drop subtle hints about Christina, testing Leonard's reactions. Leonard, thinking he was safe, spoke freely about their relationship. He even mentioned how he was looking forward to a future with her, once Walter was out of the picture. Walter listened, making mental notes. After the boxes were moved, Walter suggested they take a break. He handed Leonard a cold beer, and they sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the tree line. As dusk settled, Walter brought up the personal matter he needed help with. He claimed it involved a delicate family issue and required Leonard's advice. Leonard, feeling a sense of camaraderie, agreed to help. Walter led Leonard back to the garage, where he had set up a makeshift office. He showed Leonard some forged documents, asking for his opinion on the legal jargon. Leonard, trying to be helpful, began to read through the papers. It was then that Walter made his move. He pretended to find something concerning in the documents and asked Leonard to look closer. As Leonard leaned in, Walter struck, using a heavy wrench he had placed nearby. The blow was swift, rendering Leonard unconscious. Walter quickly tied Leonard up, ensuring he couldn't escape. With Leonard securely bound, Walter retrieved a pre-written note from his bag. He placed it on Leonard's chest, making it appear as if Leonard had written it himself. The note contained a confession to multiple crimes, implicating him in illegal activities and painting him as the mastermind behind a series of frauds. Walter then called the police, using a burner phone to report suspicious activity at the cabin. He left the scene quickly, driving back to town. As he drove, he felt a sense of grim satisfaction, knowing that his plan had succeeded. Leonard would be found, arrested, and taken down by his own actions, Thanks to Walter's careful orchestration, Walter paced around the cabin, making sure every detail of his plan was in place. He checked his watch. Leonard was due to arrive any minute. The secluded location was perfect, no neighbors, no interruptions. He double-checked the tools and props he had arranged to stage the scene. Leonard pulled up in his car, stepping out and waving as he approached the cabin. "Hey, Walter. What's the urgent matter?" he called out. Walter greeted him with a firm handshake, ushering him inside. "Thanks for coming, Leonard. I really appreciate it," Walter said, guiding him to the living room where he had set up a small table with documents. "I need your advice on this investment plan. It's a bit complicated." Leonard sat down, skimming through the papers Walter handed him. Walter watched intently, waiting for the right moment. He started the conversation lightly, discussing business ventures and mutual acquaintances. As they talked, Walter subtly shifted the topic to Christina. "You know, Christina has been acting strange lately," Walter began. "She's been distant. I can't help but wonder if there's someone else." Leonard stiffened slightly, trying to maintain his composure. I wouldn't know about that, Walter. Maybe it's just a phase." Walter leaned in, his tone growing more accusatory. "Come on, Leonard. I know you've been seeing her. I've got proof." He tossed a folder of incriminating photos onto the table. Leonard's face paled. "Walter, I can explain. It's not what you think." "Save it," Walter snapped, standing up. "You've been lying to me, betraying me. How long did you think you could keep this up?" The argument quickly escalated, voices rising. Walter accused Leonard of manipulating Christina, while Leonard tried to defend himself, claiming their relationship was genuine. The tension in the room was palpable. Walter, anticipating the confrontation, had placed a heavy wrench within reach. As the argument grew more heated, he grabbed it, brandishing it menacingly. "You think you can just take my wife and get away with it?" he shouted. Leonard raised his hands defensively. "Walter, put that down. We can talk this out." But Walter was beyond reasoning. He swung the wrench, striking Leonard on the shoulder. Leonard stumbled back, trying to escape. The struggle moved outside, onto the porch. Leonard managed to land a few blows, but Walter was relentless. In the chaos, Walter swung the wrench again, hitting Leonard squarely on the head. Leonard collapsed, unconscious. Walter stood over him, breathing heavily, the realization of what he had done sinking in. Walter quickly went into action, knowing he had to stage the scene to look like a mugging gone wrong. He rifled through Leonard's pockets, scattering their contents around. He grabbed a knife from the kitchen, making shallow cuts on Leonard's arms to simulate a struggle. He overturned furniture, broke a few items, and scattered valuables around to make it look like a robbery. He wiped his fingerprints from everything he touched, using gloves he had brought specifically for this purpose. With the scene set, Walter dragged Leonard's body to the edge of the clearing, near the driveway, positioning him as if he had been trying to flee. He planted a fake wallet near Leonard, filled with cash and a forged ID, to suggest a random mugger had attacked. Satisfied with his work, Walter took a deep breath and left the cabin, making sure to leave no trace of his involvement. He drove back to town, stopping at a gas station to change his clothes and dispose of the gloves and wrench in a dumpster. Back home, Walter acted normally. He watched TV, prepared dinner, and made casual conversation with Christina. When the police arrived the next day, reporting Leonard's death, Walter feigned shock and grief, playing the role of the concerned husband perfectly. As the investigation unfolded, Walter remained calm, knowing he had covered his tracks. The police concluded it was a mugging gone wrong, and with no evidence pointing to Walter, he felt a sense of grim satisfaction. Leonard was gone, and Walter's plan had worked. Christina was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and she flipped pancakes on the griddle. The radio played softly in the background, a local news station covering mundane updates about the town. Walter sat at the table, reading the morning paper, occasionally glancing at his phone. The phone rang, piercing the calm morning. Christina wiped her hands on a towel and picked it up. "Hello?" she answered. "Mrs. Christina Anderson?" a voice on the other end asked. "This is Detective Harris from the County Police Department. I'm afraid I have some difficult news." Christina's heart skipped a beat, but she remained composed. Yes, this is Christina. What's happened? We've found a body at a remote cabin, the detective continued. We believe it's someone you know, a Leonard Miller. For a moment, Christina felt a surge of joy. She imagined the scenario where Leonard had dealt with Walter, allowing them to be together. Leonard? Are you sure? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Yes, ma'am. We need you to come down to the station to identify the body, the detective replied. Christina quickly hung up the phone, her mind racing. She turned to Walter, who looked at her with feigned curiosity. What's wrong? He asked. Nothing. Just a call from the police. I need to go down to the station, she said, trying to keep her excitement in check. I'll be back soon. She grabbed her coat and keys, heading out the door. The drive to the police station felt like an eternity. She imagined a future where she and Leonard could be together openly, without fear or hiding. Her thoughts were interrupted when she arrived at the station. Inside, Detective Harris greeted her and led her to a small room with a large window. I'm sorry to put you through this, he said, pulling back a curtain to reveal a body on a gurney. Christina's eyes widened as she saw the lifeless form of Leonard. Her breath caught in her throat, and she staggered back. No, this can't be, she whispered, her joy turning to horror. Leonard, I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson, the detective said sympathetically. We believe it was a mugging gone wrong. We're investigating the matter thoroughly. Christina nodded numbly, barely hearing the detective's words. She couldn't believe it. Leonard was gone, and her plans for a new life with him had shattered. The detective led her back to the front office, where she mechanically filled out some paperwork before leaving. Back in her car, Christina sat in stunned silence. She felt an overwhelming sense of loss and betrayal. She had been so close to having everything she wanted, and now it was all gone. She drove home slowly, her mind numb with shock. When she arrived, Walter was still at the kitchen table, now reading a book. He looked up as she walked in. Everything okay? He asked. Christina shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. It's Leonard. He's dead. Walter feigned surprise. What happened? They said it was a mugging. They found his body at a cabin, she replied, sinking into a chair. I can't believe it. Walter reached out, patting her hand. I'm so sorry, Christina. This must be very hard for you. Christina nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I thought we could be together. Walter maintained his calm demeanor. I know this is difficult, but we'll get through this. Together. Over the next few days, Christina went through the motions of her daily life in a daze. She cooked, cleaned, and attended social events with Walter, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the image of Leonard's lifeless body from her mind. Meanwhile, Walter continued his routine, ensuring that everything appeared normal. He went to work, attended meetings, and socialized with friends. He kept a close eye on Christina, ready to provide support and comfort whenever she needed it. As days turned into weeks, the police investigation continued, but there were no leads. Walter's careful planning and execution had paid off. Leonard's death was officially ruled as a mugging gone wrong, and Walter remained free from suspicion. Christina, however, was left with the haunting realization that her lover was gone forever. She had to live with the consequences of her actions, all the while wondering if she could have done something differently to prevent this tragic outcome. As time passed, Christina found it increasingly difficult to maintain a facade of normalcy. Her daily routines became mechanical, devoid of the excitement and hope she once felt. She attended community events, participated in local charity drives, and even hosted dinner parties with Walter, but the emptiness inside her persisted. One evening, while preparing for bed, Christina received another call from Detective Harris. Mrs. Anderson, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We haven't found any significant leads, but we're not giving up, he said. Thank you, Detective, Christina replied, her voice flat. Please keep me informed. Walter overheard the conversation and approached Christina. What did the detective say? They're still investigating, but they have no leads, Christina replied, staring at the wall. I just can't believe he's gone. Walter put his arm around her, feigning empathy. "We'll get through this, Christina. We have each other." The days continued to drag on. Christina took long walks through the park, trying to find solace in nature. She visited cafes where she and Leonard used to meet, reliving their moments together. Every corner of the town reminded her of him, making it hard to escape her grief. One afternoon, while cleaning out Leonard's apartment, he had given her a spare key months ago. Christina found a small, locked box hidden under his bed. She brought it home and carefully opened it, discovering letters, photos, and small mementos of their relationship. As she read through the letters, tears streamed down her face, but she also felt a strange sense of closure. She knew Leonard had truly loved her, and these tangible memories were all she had left of him. Walter continued to play the role of the supportive husband. He suggested they take a vacation to help her heal, booking a trip to a quiet beach town. They spent a week there, walking along the shore, dining at seaside restaurants, and attempting to reconnect. Despite his efforts, Christina remained distant, her thoughts always drifting back to Leonard. Upon returning home, Christina threw herself into volunteer work, hoping to fill the void left by Leonard's death. She joined a local women's shelter, helping those in need and finding some purpose in her own life. Walter encouraged her, relieved that she seemed to be finding a new focus. One evening, while organizing donations at the shelter, Christina overheard a conversation between two women discussing a recent string of muggings in the area. They mentioned a pattern, similar to what had happened to Leonard. Intrigued, Christina decided to investigate further, determined to find out more about the circumstances surrounding his death. She visited the local library, combing through old newspapers and police reports. The more she read, the more convinced she became that something didn't add up. She started keeping a journal, noting down inconsistencies and possible connections. Her obsession with uncovering the truth grew, consuming her every waking moment. Meanwhile, Walter noticed Christina's renewed focus on Leonard's death. He grew uneasy, worried that her investigation might lead her to discover his involvement. He decided to keep a closer watch on her, subtly steering conversations away from the topic whenever it arose. One night, Christina confronted Walter with her suspicions. "I've been looking into Leonard's death, and I think there's more to it than a simple mugging," she said, her eyes narrowing. Walter remained calm. "Christina, I know you're hurting, but sometimes things are just as they seem. Maybe it's time to let it go and move on." Christina shook her head. "I can't, Walter. I need to know the truth." As Christina's investigation intensified, Walter knew he had to act fast to protect his secret. He began to devise a plan to divert her attention and ensure she never uncovered the truth about what really happened to Leonard. Christina returned home from her evening shift at the women's shelter, exhausted and lost in thought. The moonlight cast long shadows in the driveway as she parked her car and headed to the front door. She noticed the porch light flickering but paid it no mind, chalking it up to a faulty bulb. Unlocking the door, she stepped into the quiet house. She slipped off her shoes and walked into the kitchen, planning to make a quick dinner before bed. On the counter, she found a single sheet of paper folded neatly. Her curiosity piqued. She picked it up and unfolded it. The words, "You're next," were scrawled in Walter's handwriting. Her breath caught, and her hands trembled as she reread the note, hoping she had misunderstood. She quickly scanned the house, calling out for Walter, but there was no response. The house was eerily silent. She checked their bedroom, looking for any sign of Walter. The closet doors were wide open, and she saw that his clothes were missing. His suitcase, usually stored on the top shelf, was gone. In a panic, she ran to the study, where Walter kept important documents. The drawers were open, papers scattered. His passport was missing. She tried to calm herself, reminding herself to think logically. She grabbed her phone and dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, she left a message. "Walter, what is this about? Where are you?" Christina decided to search the house for any other clues. She went to the garage, where Walter's car was notably absent. She checked his desk in the study again, finding only disorganized paperwork and a few scattered bills. She opened his laptop, but it was password protected. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Christina called the police. She explained the note and Walter's sudden disappearance. The dispatcher assured her that an officer would be sent to her house immediately. While waiting, Christina went to the living room and turned on the TV, hoping to distract herself. She flipped through channels absent-mindedly, stopping on a news report about a recent string of muggings. The familiar sensation of dread washed over her as she listened to the details. The doorbell rang, breaking her trance. She opened the door to find Officer Jacobs, a seasoned policeman with a kind face. "Mrs. Anderson? I'm Officer Jacobs. You reported a threatening note and your husband's disappearance?" "Yes, come in," Christina said, stepping aside to let him enter. She handed him the note and explained everything that had happened, from Leonard's death to Walter's recent behavior. Officer Jacobs took notes, occasionally nodding. "We'll issue a bolo for your husband and notify the airport authorities. In the meantime, do you have any friends or family you can stay with?" Christina shook her head. "No, I'm alone here." "All right," he said, handing back the note. "We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood. If you see or hear anything suspicious, call us immediately." After the officer left, Christina sat on the couch, clutching her phone. She decided to call her friend Emily, hoping for some comfort and advice. Emily answered on the third ring. "Hey, Christina. What's up?" "Emily, I need your help. Walter's gone, and he left a threatening note," Christina said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Oh my God. Are you okay? Do you want me to come over?" Emily asked, concern evident in her voice. "Please, if you can. I don't want to be alone right now," Christina replied. Within 20 minutes, Emily arrived, bringing a sense of relief. They sat in the living room, talking about everything that had happened. Emily suggested changing the locks and installing a security system. "You need to protect yourself," she insisted. They spent the next few hours planning. Emily called a locksmith who agreed to come the next morning. They also researched security systems, eventually ordering one that would be installed the following week. As the night wore on, Christina felt a mix of exhaustion and unease. She thanked Emily for staying over and decided to try to get some sleep. Lying in bed, she replayed the events of the past few days in her mind. She knew she had to be cautious and vigilant. Walter's note was a clear warning, and she had no idea what he might do next. The house felt emptier than ever, and the silence was deafening. As Christina drifted off to a restless sleep, she resolved to stay strong and find out what had driven Walter to such extremes. Christina woke early the next morning, the events of the previous night replaying in her mind like a horror movie. She made coffee but found it impossible to drink. Instead, she paced around the living room, her thoughts racing. The note from Walter haunted her. "You're next." Those words were etched into her mind, a constant reminder of the danger she was in. She couldn't believe Walter would go to such lengths, but the evidence was staring her in the face. With a sense of urgency, Christina called the police station again. Officer Jacobs answered, his voice calm and reassuring. "Mrs. Anderson, we're doing everything we can to locate your husband. In the meantime, please stay vigilant and let us know if anything else happens." Christina thanked him and hung up, feeling somewhat reassured but still deeply unsettled. She decided to take matters into her own hands. She packed a small bag with essentials, clothes, toiletries, and important documents, and drove to a nearby hotel where she checked in under an assumed name. In the safety of her hotel room, Christina sat at the small desk and began to brainstorm. She needed to gather evidence against Walter, but she had no idea where to start. She pulled out her laptop and started researching, digging through old emails and messages. She found nothing incriminating. Frustrated, Christina called Emily again, hoping for guidance. Emily suggested hiring a private investigator to help gather evidence discreetly. Christina agreed, feeling a surge of hope. She found a reputable investigator online and scheduled a meeting for later that day. The investigator, Mr. Wilson, arrived at the hotel promptly. He was a middle-aged man with a no-nonsense demeanor. Christina explained her situation, showing him the note from Walter and recounting the events leading up to Leonard's death. Mr. Wilson listened attentively, nodding occasionally. "I'll start by looking into Walter's financial records, travel history, and any connections he might have," Mr. Wilson said, jotting down notes. "We'll need to proceed carefully to avoid tipping him off." Christina agreed, feeling a glimmer of optimism. She gave Mr. Wilson all the information she could remember about Walter's habits and acquaintances. They agreed to keep in touch regularly, and Mr. Wilson promised to update her with any findings. Over the next few days, Christina tried to maintain a sense of normalcy while waiting for news from Mr. Wilson. She attended her volunteer shifts at the shelter, where she found solace in helping others. She kept her phone close at all times, anxiously awaiting updates. One afternoon, Mr. Wilson called with a breakthrough. "Christina, I found something," he said, his voice low. "Walter has been transferring large sums of money to an offshore account over the past few months. It seems he's been planning this for a while." Christina's heart raced. This was the proof she needed. "Can you trace the transactions? Find out where the money is going?" "I'm working on it," Mr. Wilson replied. "But this is a good start. It suggests Walter had a motive for leaving the country and possibly harming you." Christina thanked him profusely and hung up, feeling a mix of relief and dread. She knew she had to be cautious. If Walter had been planning this for months, he was likely several steps ahead. Later that evening, Christina received a call from Officer Jacobs. "Mrs. Anderson, we found Walter's car abandoned at the airport. There's no sign of him boarding a flight, but we're checking security footage." Christina's stomach churned. "Thank you, Officer Jacobs. Please let me know if you find anything." She hung up, her mind racing. Walter was close. She could feel it. She locked the hotel room door, double-checked the windows, and sat on the edge of the bed, clutching her phone. She was alone, afraid, and unsure of what would happen next. Christina woke to the sound of her phone buzzing on the bedside table. She reached for it groggily, glancing at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number. Her heart skipped a beat as she read the cryptic message. "Did you miss me, Christina?" She stared at the message, her mind racing. It had been weeks since Walter disappeared, and now this. She hesitated before responding, unsure of what to say. Another message came through. "I'm closer than you think." Fear gripped Christina as she realized Walter was still out there, watching her. She quickly called Officer Jacobs, her voice urgent. "Officer Jacobs, I just received a message from Walter. He knows where I am." "We're tracing the call, Mrs. Anderson." "Stay calm," Officer Jacobs replied, his voice steady. Christina waited anxiously, her eyes darting around the hotel room. Every sound made her jump. Finally, Officer Jacobs called back. The call came from a burner phone. "We're working on tracking its location." Christina thanked him and hung up, feeling more vulnerable than ever. She decided to stay put in the hotel room, locking the door and drawing the curtains. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Hours passed without any further messages or calls. Christina tried to distract herself by reading a book, but she couldn't focus. She kept checking her phone, half expecting another message from Walter. That evening, Christina met with Mr. Wilson again. He had gathered more information about Walter's activities before he disappeared. "Christina, I found records of Walter renting a cabin in a remote area just before he went missing," Mr. Wilson said, showing her the documents. Christina studied them closely. "Do you think he's hiding there?" "It's possible," Mr. Wilson replied. "I've alerted the police, and they're planning a search. But we need to be prepared for anything." Christina nodded, feeling a sense of determination. She couldn't let Walter continue to control her life. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Please keep me updated." Back at the hotel, Christina tried to relax, but her mind kept going back to Walter's messages. She couldn't understand why he was tormenting her like this. What did he want? The next morning, Officer Jacobs called with an update. "Christina, we found the cabin Walter rented. It's in a remote forested area about 2 hours from here." Christina's heart raced. "Are you going there?" "We're sending a team now to investigate," Officer Jacobs assured her. "Please stay where you are and keep your phone nearby." Christina paced the hotel room, waiting anxiously for news. Hours passed before she finally received a call from Officer Jacobs. "Christina, we found the cabin," he said. "But Walter wasn't there. It looks like he left in a hurry." Frustration and fear washed over Christina. How could Walter always stay one step ahead? "What now?" "We're widening our search," Officer Jacobs replied. "We won't stop until we find him." Christina thanked him and hung up, feeling defeated. She sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of everything. Walter's messages had left her shaken and paranoid. She couldn't trust anyone, not even herself. Days turned into weeks as Christina waited for news. She continued to stay in the hotel, unable to return home or resume her normal life. Every sound made her jump, every stranger made her wary. One afternoon, while checking her email, Christina found a message from an unfamiliar address. Her heart raced as she opened it. Inside was a photo of her, taken from a distance, unaware. The message simply read, "Always watching." Christina's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. Walter was still out there, closer than she ever imagined. She knew then that she couldn't rest until he was caught. She had to be strong, for her own sake and for justice to prevail. Weeks turned into months as Christina lived in a state of constant vigilance. The messages from Walter had stopped, but the fear lingered, a silent presence in her life. She had relocated to a small apartment in a different part of town, hoping to evade any further contact from her estranged husband. One rainy afternoon, Christina received a call from Officer Jacobs. His voice was grave. "Christina, we've found Walter." Relief flooded through Christina, quickly followed by apprehension. "Where is he?" "He's in another country," Officer Jacobs explained. "We've been working with international authorities to track him down. It's taken time, but we finally have a location." Christina's mind raced. She had prepared herself for this moment, but now that it had arrived, she felt a mix of emotions, fear, anger, and a strange sense of closure. "What happens now?" "We're coordinating with local law enforcement to apprehend him," Officer Jacobs replied. "We'll keep you updated on the progress." Christina thanked him and hung up, feeling a weight lifted off her shoulders. She knew this was the first step toward reclaiming her life. She spent the next few days trying to focus on work and maintaining a sense of normalcy. A week later, Christina received another call from Officer Jacobs. "Christina, we've captured Walter. He's in custody." Relief washed over Christina once more. "Thank you, Officer Jacobs. Thank you for everything." She hung up the phone, feeling a mix of emotions, relief, vindication, and a lingering sense of betrayal. She had trusted Walter once, loved him even, but now she saw him for who he truly was, a manipulative and dangerous man. As the days passed, Christina tried to move forward. She met with a lawyer to discuss her options and what would happen next. Walter's capture meant facing the legal consequences of his actions, but Christina was prepared to do whatever it took to ensure justice was served. One evening, while going through old boxes in her new apartment, Christina found a letter addressed to her from Walter. It was dated before his disappearance. She hesitated before opening it, unsure of what she would find inside. The letter revealed Walter's true intentions. He admitted to orchestrating everything from the beginning: Leonard's death, the framing of an innocent person, even the messages he had sent to Christina. He claimed it was all part of a plan to punish her for her betrayal. Christina felt a wave of disbelief and anger wash over her as she read the letter. How could he have done this? How could he have been capable of such deceit? She took the letter to her lawyer, who advised her to keep it safe as evidence. The legal proceedings against Walter were underway, and Christina knew she had to be prepared for whatever came next. Months passed as the case against Walter unfolded. He was extradited back to their home country to stand trial for his crimes. Christina attended every court hearing, facing Walter in the courtroom with a steely resolve. In the end, Walter was convicted of multiple charges, including murder, conspiracy, and fraud. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Christina felt a sense of closure as she left the courtroom for the last time. The chapter of her life with Walter was finally closed, but the scars remained. She knew it would take time to heal from the trauma he had inflicted upon her. As Christina walked out into the sunlight, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She was free, free from Walter's manipulation, free from his control. She knew she could finally start anew, building a life for herself without fear or regret.